Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with a totem guide for 3.13 after all the changes. Basically, this is going to be a freezing pulse totem guide, but it's going to work for like a lot of different builds. It almost kind of doesn't really matter like what you want to do. This should pretty much take care of it. I will say it does kind of favor skills that have high damage effectiveness, so things like maybe fireball totems, freeze pulse totems, purifying flame totems, etc. So I just wanted to have the game up there so my Discord like latches onto it, if that makes sense. Okay. So we have the POB, and I've got my notepad on the other monitor. Okay. So why Inquisitor, right? That's the thing that we're going for here. Decided to do Inquis because Hyro just honestly lost a lot of its, well, not a lot of its appeal. Like, I would say, first of all, if you're going for a tanky hardcore build, Hierophant still does have a lot of advantages in the sense that you can kind of get more life without having to invest into mana as much, because the mana just kind of comes from the Ascendancy, and it's pretty nice. You can get the defensive endurance charge boost, or the increased arcane surge or something like that. Like, there's still good stuff in there. And if you're trying to build like a ton of defense and you don't really care about your damage as much, that's definitely still a good option. You would just put multiple totem support in if you're using like a clearing totem like Freezing Pulse or something like that, and you should be absolutely fine. You're going to have like worse damage per totem, but you're going to have more totems. Less chance to freeze, which kind of sucks, or not really less chance to freeze, but your freeze threshold is not going to be as good, right? But it's still going to be a perfectly functional build. It didn't get completely destroyed like some people are saying. It just was, in my opinion, overall kind of like a nerf and just like reduction in flexibility of how you can play stuff if you're playing Hyro. But what we want to do is, I seen this node on Inquisitor and I wanted to build around it, and it's Battle Mage, and this shit is fucking cracked. So that's basically like the concept behind this build, and I'll explain everything, of course, but just to kind of get into the meat of it first. Like, so what Battle Mage does is it added spell damage equal to the damage of your main hand weapon. Now the thing is, initially I had a couple thoughts on this. I was like, I think initially this is going to be just the actual, like, probably physical damage of the weapon. Like, kind of like the, it's auto damage, essentially, which I guess in theory would take into account everything, like all the addeds. But for some reason I was thinking it might just be like the fizz damage. I wasn't sure. I didn't know how like optimistic to be about it, right? Turns out basically any like added weapon modifier on your weapon contributes to this. So if you have a Rebuke of the Vaal like you see here, which is going to be our pretty good budget weapon, it just has like a bunch of flat, and it's really fucking insane. I believe if you got like a decent one, these might be more sought after now because, of the changes. But I was gonna say maybe you can corrupt it for something cool. It doesn't really look like there's that much good on there, unfortunately, for a lot of the builds we're going to play. But I guess it depends on if Onslaught would work. I don't think it would work, but I think it's probably on your kill. But I don't know. It's interesting. You could try it out. Anyway, yeah, it just takes all the flat from your weapon. Now, one thing it does not do is, let me see if I still have the setup here. Okay. So I'll just put one of these rings on. One thing it does not do is it doesn't take added damage to attacks that you get elsewhere in your build, like for example on rings or an amulet or something like that. Like if you had added this damage to attacks, and it doesn't add that towards the Battle Mage value. Not that it's supposed to, but I just want to make people aware that like it is only the damage on the weapon. It's kind of like, think of it as like the weapon's a stat stick in that regard, in regards to like the flat values. So it's not like you can just add stuff all over on the tree and it's going to keep adding to that. I wasn't like, I didn't think it would be that way, but I kind of was thinking, like, after I realized that it took these into account as well, I was like, oh, maybe that other stuff is counted as, like, the weapon because it's getting added to the weapon damage, essentially, in terms of how the DPS calculation works. But it's not like that at all, and I tested it by putting in a ring with flat fizz and nothing. So just to clear that up right off the bat. Now, in the other video, it was kind of like more long form, where I went over everything in a lot of detail. I'm going to try and be a bit more concise this time around. This right here is going to be the budget version. And it still is highly functional, does a lot of damage. But this is going to be, it's like level 90. I think you can see like this says level 95 I have it at, but it's level 90 in terms of point requirement. And it's just like super budget options across the board. Everything in this should be easy. Use the 5 link. Yeah, so that's the difference between this and the last video. So basically, you're just getting a ton of flat with Battle Mage on a skill that scales flat really well, the high damage effectiveness, or has like a lot of multiple hits that can like essentially take advantage of that really well. And then you just do like a normal Inquisitor build. I will say that there's like very good synergy between Instruments of Virtue here with the Battle Mage and Inevitable Judgment, because one of the things you'll notice is that like with this weapon, there's a lot of different types of elements, right? And to scale all those properly, it helps to just be able to ignore the resistances, right? Because it's kind of hard to get like a ton of global pen, if that makes sense. So just being able to ignore all resistances is nice, because you don't have to focus around scaling any sort of pen, really. It's just, you know, you don't have to worry about scaling multiple types of pen either, which is even more of a pain in the ass. I will say the kind of shitty thing is that like Frostbomb is nice inherent cold exposure for cold builds, right? It's an easy one to kind of get up there, but it doesn't really last that long. It's still kind of like a lot of maintenance if you want to keep the uptime of it super high. So in practice, it doesn't really turn out to be as good as you would think in the PoB. Whereas Inquisitor is like always going to be kind of like around this damage pretty much all the time, because you're just penning, right? Like on average, you're penning that amount. So your damage is going to be much more consistent. So in terms of the order of getting these, I would definitely get Battle Mage first. It's going to help a lot while leveling. And then get like... So here's the thing. This is probably going to be the next highest DPS increase node. But getting to Inevitable Judgment is kind of going to be what you want in terms of like once you're in maps and like, you know, wanting your build to feel somewhat finished, Inevitable Judgment's going to be way more core than this, right? So this is definitely kind of like icing on the cake, and this is gonna do more damage. Like pathing to this is gonna definitely do more damage than that, for sure. Because if you take this, you're only gonna be able to get to this before Uber Lab. Of course, Uber is pretty easy to kill nowadays and get to, especially in softcore with all the people sharing the labs on in like the 820 channel or whatever. But yeah, definitely if you're not going to get to Uber for a while, make sure you take this. If you think you're just going to get there super fast anyway, you know, this is like a higher damage boost in the moment when you first get access to Cruel Lab. So you can make your own decision there, but I would recommend going here, filling out this, and then finishing with this. So the tree, okay, so basically the tree is like pretty standard totem tree, I would say so far. The main thing that's going to look weird about it is like the threshold jewels, and there's one change I made in the middle here that might seem a little bit strange. So I'll go over the jewels first, I guess. The main ones that we want are going to be... Let's go over the notables, rather. So we want Shrieking Bolts, Ancestral Inspiration, and Sleepless Sentries. Although, in this version of the build right here, in this PoB, it's not actually blood magic. So you don't need this at all, and you actually want like a better damage notable here. When you're starting, you probably would just look for a cold large threshold, not threshold, cluster jewel, right? Because it'll be more damage overall, and there's probably a better notable for sure. I think there's even a better notable on the spell damage one itself. The reason why I was taking this is because there's a blood magic version of this build that is in the other PoB, and that one, obviously, if you have blood magic, you can't really get Arcane Surge the normal way, and this is like a very cost-effective way to get Arcane Surge, right? So that's why that's in there. You just change it around if you're doing this version when you're starting off, because you're not going to have like the Malachi head item to go blood magic right out the gate. Hold on 1 second, Clyde. I'm doing a video. Okay, so Shrieking Bolts and Sleepless Sentries, and then you just finish off the Jewel Socket. So you'll see that I have like extra notables here. The main focus is getting Shrieking Bolts, Sleepless Sentries, and then Cold Conduction. You can get those however. You can even get them on a Megalomaniac if you find one that's like really good. The thing is like you're unlikely to find that, I feel like. Although if you do find it, it might be kind of cheap because it's a weird combination. You want this for the Taunt, you want this for the Onslaught, and you want this for the Shock. It's like 15% Shock. It's pretty nutty. So, and you can just scale that up with Shock Effect if you want. So those are the ones that you're mainly targeting. Obviously, that comes from the effects of non-damaging ailments, then the Totem one, and the Projectile one. And then these are like the gravy ones, right? Like if you have the chance to get a really good Totem one or a really good Projectile one, these are what you want. You want Streamlined because it gives projectile speed, and then you want Ancestral Echo because it gives more placement speed, which this build like doesn't have as much as Hyro. So you kind of want to be able to get as much as you can, really, right? Then Overshock is the other one you can get on here. It's pretty good. It increases your shock effectiveness. I think this gives you like 3 or 4% more damage, which is pretty damn good for one notable. I mean, you can't really argue with that, right? And then obviously you just fill out the jewel sockets. But in the event that you can't get like super good cluster jewels, it doesn't really matter. You're just not going to have these. That's why they're unallocated here. What I do is like, how I did it with this is I took the points out of this Snowforged and I put 1, 1, 1, because this is really just more raw damage and a little bit of resist, whereas these are like much more utility based, right? Like extra projectile speed is going to help a lot, the placement speed, etc. And then this is just raw damage. So I think it's definitely worth to remove these. I mean, or you could just level up more, right? Or you could take a point out of some of the life or stuff like that, but that's where I remove the points. So I think that's mainly the tree. Oh, so interesting thing here. So right off the start, I would suggest not targeting Shaman's Dominion, only because this cluster right here is actually kind of nice when you don't have much placement speed. As Hyro, I would never recommend getting this. I think it's kind of like a bait. But they did buff it at some point and gave these small nodes 5% extra placement speed, so you get 10. They still do totem damage, and like it's a decent amount of damage. I mean, with the placement speed, it's definitely not bad. It's just that if the placement speed isn't really needed, then it's not really a good damage cluster, right? So in this case, especially if you think you're struggling at all with placement speed, I say fucking go for it, right? Just snag that shit. Yeah. That's how I would deal with that. Any other things? Oh, so coming down here to Glancing Blows. So I take Glancing Blows on this version because I'm using the Troll Timber Spire, which gives me Leech. You can also use another extra Totem Shield. You can use another shield. The thing is, like, here's my analysis on this shit, right? It's like, if you're going to use a +1 Totem Shield, for some reason, they seem very expensive at the start of new leagues. The mod is rare, but I don't think it's really, like, people see it as, like, a end-all, be-all mod, because they're like, oh, it's a totem build, needs an additional totem. But in reality, it's like, you're giving up a lot of damage sometimes. You can get on, like, a really cheap wand for, like, under 10C, for, like, a Totem Shield that's probably going to cost an Exalt and not have much else on it, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to have your totem thing, maybe a bit of life, and you can craft something else. It's just not going to be a super good shield that you're going to get. And it's going to still be kind of expensive, especially early on. So, in my opinion, if you're not going to get... if you're not going to use this Troll Timber Spire, I would just use like something like this. Like this would be like an incursion, like a temple weapon that has really good stats, boost your damage by a lot, as you can see, and is going to be probably under 10 chaos. Excuse me. Maybe not day one, but definitely fairly quickly. And to be honest, you can snipe some of these things really early for very small amounts of chaos because people are selling them just trying to get any amount of chaos. So if you know like what to look for, which I usually just search by the incursion mod, which is the 25 or 20 some to 26% cast speed and the flat added to chaos to spells, and then I'll search it with something like in the actual added itself on the prefix, and then I'll just see what comes up, and I'll just look for things that have like spell damage and crit multi. So I'd be on the lookout for stuff like that. You can't use another one of these because Battle Mage is only for the main hand, right? So keep that in mind. I tried some staff setups and stuff like that. It doesn't really seem worth it. Yeah. Now, as you can see, I have some other weapons in here. These are like foils you can make. I tried a couple things. I tried double, flat with like spell damage, double flat with like whatever. I think the best thing was like triple flat with multi on a multi base. This is for like more of your end game though. And if I put this on, oh, hold on. Now we have to. Okay, so if I put this on in place, as you see, it's not even that like you don't even gain that much. Oh my god, that's not the right thing. That's a staff. Sorry. Okay. So if you put this on, you don't even lose that much damage, really, right? It's not like a super significant loss. So this is a really good starting weapon for sure. As long as you can get like semi-decent rolls on it, you don't need a good attack speed roll at all. So that helps. But yeah, the reason why... So if you are using the Leech Shield, back to the original point of this, you want to just pick up this node because, see, it's close by, and it's actually super helpful to not getting one-shot. And people are going to come up with all... Like, there's definitely math, I think, that suggests that this is probably not, like, a super effective mitigation tool in the sense of raw mitigation, right? In terms... Because when you block, normally you're blocking 100%. So even though you're blocking more with this, like double, essentially, you're taking more than half of the damage from the block. You know what I mean? But just the fact that you can't be, like... This like means when you have a chance where if you block that hit, you have a higher chance to block on average, right? And blocking something is better than nothing, essentially, right? And you kind of have a fairly low chance to block any given thing when you're running a shield normally and you're not investing into block. That's why I take Glancing Blows. You don't have to take it. It's just something I like. In some versions of this, I'll come down and snag Unwavering Stance. This version's just a bit tight. If you could find like a really good Megalomaniac, then accessing this would be a lot easier. But in this version, like I said, it is pretty tight. You can still grab it if you want. You just sack some life or damage in other places, right? We also still have like some points to go, essentially, if that makes sense. So, but I find that a lot of times you'll be fine as long as you run Soul of the Brine King here. The one where you can't be chain stunned, essentially. So that's kind of how I deal with that. Yeah, so that's this node. Again, this is a possible option. I've run Comb's Roots to get this, but running Comb's Roots is a bit complicated because at that point you really need to start looking around your tree and like so for example, if I was going to run Comb's Roots, I probably wouldn't take Throat Seeker. I'd probably just path down this way, path up to here through this, and then grab Nimbleness. And then also grab Precision, because they give some movement speed. Like, you need to kind of, like, make up for the movement speed in other ways. Typically, I'd like to make sure that they're corrupted with at least 10% movement speed or something like that. You know what I mean? Or, like, Lab Enchanted. I think there's, like, a Lab Enchant. Ideally, you'd have both, but that's going to be hard. So there are some things you can do with Comb's Roots. And it's, like, a nice, huge, like, boost to life. The problem is this build doesn't get a ton of percent life to begin with. So, like, you're not going to notice that boost as much, if that makes sense. So just something to keep in mind there. Trying to think if there's anything else kind of weird about the tree. So I think one of the things I was recently looking into is just swapping. This is a mana-based build at the moment, and I was thinking of just swapping this, like taking the 3 points out of here. Let's see what it would bring the mana to. So we're at 1295, well, 1171 usable mana with 109 mana regen. If we remove that, go into here. 1171. Yeah, it's definitely like worse, but we're gaining like more damage, that's for sure. Right? We're not gaining any damage going this. So it's kind of like whatever you want. I don't know. You could take either. I've also put 2 points into this before, but I feel like if you're going to put 2 points into this, you'll probably be fine putting points into this. The build is probably not going to struggle on mana, I would say, but the good news is you're kind of surrounded by decent mana clusters. So like if you need it, you can invest into it. If you don't, you don't. You know what I mean? And it's probably also going to depend, too, on your gear. Like, if you can snag some mana on some of the rare pieces, that's always going to be nice. Not a requirement. But all that stuff is kind of going to augment how much you need, essentially, like how much mana regen and stuff like that. Especially on a 5-link, though. This doesn't cost, like, that much mana. So, I think that's, like, the last major tree thing. So, let me go over some of the... I'll go over the gear and on the gems and stuff. So obviously we're running 2 first snows. Better to corrupt them if you can, but obviously, like, you know, right off the gate you're not going to have them corrupted. Self-flagnation. Obviously this is our bread and butter, right? It nerfed a little bit a couple patches ago in the sense that we get less curses, but it's still really good. These are just a cluster jewel. I'd say anything that's not a cluster jewel, you're going to want to try and run like cold damage and then cold multi with life. And then like some other type of multi or just general damage. Like some other multi that affects the build, like spells, elemental, or something like that. Or just a general damage, maybe like totem damage or cold damage or something like that. That's what I would put on the Cobalt Jewels. Yeah, so that's pretty much... what that comes down to. Flask, you're going to be running Life Flask, probably a Seething Staunching with a Quicksilver. Then you're going to want to have a Diamond Flask, obviously, and then a Basalt Flask, and this is Ziri's Promise. You're not going to really make use of a Wise Oak unless you're trying to go exclusively for the reduced damage taken. If so, that's absolutely fine. That's definitely like a viable thing. But if you just want damage and a bit more Chaos Res to run around the map with, a Ziri's Promise is nice. Some people look at Ziri's Promise and they'll be like, oh, the damage it's providing isn't that great. You know, like, why would you run it? And that's fairly true, to be honest, but the 35% of Chaos Res is pretty sizable, especially if you're like kind of being aware and you're popping it at the right time. I'm not saying you're always going to be able to do that, but as you get more experience with the game, you know, you'll notice when there's like chaos stuff around you, you'll know what bosses do chaos damage, and when you're kind of getting close to place stuff down and stuff like that and get your burst off, having this popped can be nice if you take a stray hit or something. So I think it's not a terrible flask, but, you know, you guys can do whatever you want there. In terms of the rest of the gear, so already mentioned, this is what I'll use. This is the weapon, pretty much, or you can make any type of foil, something like that. Or you can even use a normal weapon, but it kind of just it defeats the point of Battle Mage a little bit, right? You're still going to get some damage from it, but in terms of other shields, Light of Lunaris is probably the only other shield I would use. It's a super good shield. It's just kind of, again, it's like the Totem Shield where it's expensive. And you're missing the Leech, but I'm saying if you don't want the Leech, I know some people don't like it in the playstyle, that shield's definitely going to give you more damage. But it's probably not going to give you more damage than like an actual real-world second weapon. Keep in mind, if you are rolling a second weapon, it's going to need to be a like a scepter or something like that, because it can't, like, you can't have a wand here basically, because it's a ranged weapon with a melee weapon. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, this is probably going to be more damage even against Light of Lunaris. The thing is, Light of Lunaris is going to allow you to run like shield charge if you really want it, and it's going to allow you to run glancing blows, right? So something to keep in mind there. Let's put this back to Troll Timber Spire. Soul Mantle, same story. If you haven't played in a while, Soul Mantle has this like weird line of text at the bottom. It doesn't affect anything, trust me. You can go read about it. I think Walla is the other guy who plays a lot of totem stuff. He made in his guide on the forums, he made a really good like write-up about it, explaining the situation. But basically just like reduced and more are two separate, they're non-overlapping magisteria, you could say in this case. So if you get 100% reduced curse effect on you, you're still golden, is how it works, and that's what we're going to be doing with this build. So in terms of this stuff, I have burning damage, like the incursion mod here. I think early on this is really good, just because you get like a fat chunk of fire res and some nice thick added damage that's going to be penned. Like usually on a normal freezing pulse build, adding like 55 to 75 fire damage to burning enemies is not a big deal at all, right? Because it's not penned or anything. But with Inevitable Judgment, it's actually really good. So yeah, I mean, this is definitely a good option. I think like late game, you're probably better off, like when you get your res in order and stuff like that, you're better off transitioning to projectile speed. It's just going to be better for you overall. And remember that on gloves, there's a lot of mods that are like adds damage or whatever. I believe, you know, like this one right here just adds 24 to 34 cold damage. So that's going to still add to your spells if you have like free slots for a little bit more damage. For boots, again, you just want life, movement speed, res, basically. You could use Doriani's Delusion. It's just that sometimes the build gets a bit unique heavy, and when that happens, it can be hard to get res, especially at the beginning when you're not using good items. So Doriani's Delusion's actually, like, if you don't need res in your boots at all, those boots are, like, super good, right? Because they give you flat, they have super high energy shield value, which we're looking for, super high life, and super high move speed. So there's really no downside to using them if you don't need the res. But if you need the res, just stick with something like Sork boots, or like the other types of boots that have like the multiple res and the implicit. Those are super good now, actually, especially at the start, because you can lab enchant them and it doesn't remove the implicit. It just adds the lab enchant. And for lab enchant, you definitely want the lightning damage if you've killed recently. You could also theoretically go crit, but you're probably going to be running some type of like brand setup to generate power charges if you feel like it. So if you're not doing that, you can just get the crit, which is also pretty decent. But if you are doing that, it's, you know, the modifier is like something like if you haven't crit recently, so you'll be critting if you're using like a brand self-casting it, right? Even though it's not doing damage, it's still critting. So you won't be getting that crit buff all the time on the boots, so I just go with this to be safe, because you're not going to be killing things as a totem build yourself. It's a lot of damage. It might even be more damage anyway than the crit. I haven't really mapped it out, but I'm sure they're fairly close. For the amulet, you just want a generic, you know, damage amulet. You could still get the Tull amulet for the pen, but the pen is not going to do much for you. It's going to do the blind, which is really nice, but you have a lot of defense with things just being frozen anyway. So I wouldn't really be super concerned about that, to be honest. And I would just get one of these. Saves a lot of money anyway. I anoint it with Sanctum of Thought. There's a bunch of other things you can do. Like, you could actually grab this and then anoint this. You know what I mean? So you can kind of go about this in a lot of different ways. But I think a first good anoint, just get your stuff ready to go after getting the Kikazarus, is definitely Sanctum of Thought. And it's a very cheap one, which is nice. Because if, like, you can get it right away and it starts helping you, and if you need to replace your amulet, it's not like, oh fuck, I just like spent a ton of my investment on an anoint on this amulet and now I found a better one or something, you know what I mean? It's like very flexible until you get a good amulet that you like. starting off, I just use Kikazaru's. I have these augmented for like mana, but you can augment whatever you want on them. You don't really need to augment curse. I mean, something you can do if you really don't even give a fuck about this is you can just augment them for caster, and those will go to like 48%, and for the effective curses on you, and then you'll be at 96 reduced effect, which is pretty good and mostly going to be manageable. So you can do that if you want. Hey Clyde, I'll be done in a second. I'm just doing a video. Sorry.
Okay.
I think I didn't. I didn't like cue my mic to talk in Discord when I said the first time. Oh well. But yeah. So that's. Oh, and then eventually you're gonna want to replace these with the Crusader rings, which have the reduced effect of curse on you. Those you're gonna need to augment with the caster catalyst, which is gonna bring them to 42% each. You could have one that's like, I think 33 and use another one that's like 34. I believe if it starts out at 34%, it still goes to 42 as the highest. And then that means that you could have one like below, like a little bit below, you know what I mean? And you'll be fine because you're getting like 42%. You just do the math on that through POB. And keep in mind that you're getting 20% from the node here, as long as you're using it. There's also another cluster jewel that it would be kind of hard to fit in though unless you had like a megalo, but it's on like when you have a flask active, it can be like any flask. I think you have 40% reduced effective curses on you or something like that. So that's another option, and that lets you kind of like change things up entirely. The main point of that is it lets you use a unique ring, kind of if you want. Because the thing is, like, once you get to using a Crusader ring, it's not really that bad because we don't have a lot of, like, insane stats on ring that you can get easily, right? Like, obviously, if you're in softcore and you're doing, like, mirror shit, like, you can make your ring super pog. But for most people in, like, a temp league, if they're just playing this build to fuck around or something and they're not investing a ton in it, you're not really going to get super dope rings. So, you know, not having a ton of insane stats on ring because you're focused on getting life and curse effect is not going to be a huge deal, right? So it's mainly a thing using that cluster jewel if you want to use a unique ring here for whatever reason. Soul Tether, this one you can do with, I think it's defenses, and it gives you 7% of maximum life as max energy shield instead of 6. So something to keep in mind there. It's pretty good. Immortal Ambition, just basically it like leeches to your health, and then if your health's full, it'll leech to your energy shield. And this is where the synergy comes in with the Troll Timber Spire, because we have leech, and then we have this, and it also gives you overleech, which is pretty damn good. I honestly really like the leech with totem builds, but if you don't like it, you can just skip this, go for a normal Stygian or something like that. Obviously, if you had Headhunter, you could use Headhunter there, but it kind of defeats the purpose of it being budget, right? So, yep. And then a couple other things. I'll talk about the gems in a second. So, in terms of Watcher's Eye, you're gonna be, if you're gonna be using a, or at all, you're gonna be using Zealotry. Now, Zealotry, you would want the one where it's like more 10% more damage taken. If you got like an insane Watcher's Eye of something else, you could then put in something like Hatred if you wanted. Hatred's going to be less damage than Zealotry off the rip, but if like you had like a really good Hatred's Watcher's Eye that gives you like base crit and then something else or something like that, it might be better, you know what I mean, because of the Watcher's Eye. But right off the bat, the Zealotry is going to be better. In terms of, and you just slot that in one of these slots, right? Now, in terms of Legion Jewels, so there's two options that I think kind of make sense, and I think there's really only one, in my opinion, at the highest end, but it's kind of expensive, so I have it here. Let me find the right slot. Okay. So, Lethal Pride, if it's with, Akoya gives Chainbreaker. Chainbreaker allows you to have Rage, and the idea is that when you have Rage, you can use Berserk. Now, Berserk usually gives more melee damage, but if you have Divergent Berserk, which is in here somewhere, and you have it paired with an Enhance, you don't have to have it enhanced, but Enhance increases the quality, and the alt quality of Berserk makes it give more spell damage, basically. So if I turn this son of a bitch on, it, like, really increases our damage, right? And then if you turn Vol Righteous Fire on top of that, you're getting a lot of damage, and then, like, if I actually had my weapons in here, like, good weapons, you see, like, we're doing a ton of damage. And that's, like, 1 mil per totem, right? It's, like, kind of nutty with all the buffs going. And this isn't even, like, the strongest version. This is the non-blood magic version, keep in mind. But, so Berserk is, like, really good. It lasts a while, too, because you don't really get the downside of it, of Chainbreaker, which is lose 5 rage when you hit an enemy because you're not hitting anything. So it will decay, but it takes a while for it to fully decay, and then it just kind of goes back to full pretty quickly, and you have pretty high uptime on it, to be honest. It also gives a bit of extra strength on these nodes, which is not bad, because it gives us, like, crit for this, because this works pretty cool now. But, yeah, so it's definitely really good. The other one you can use is the Vol Gem, the Glorious Vanity one, which gives Corrupted Soul. Now, Corrupted Soul is going to give you a bunch more energy shield, as you can see. But it's going to kind of, like, fuck with certain things, right? Because it's going to take over these nodes, essentially. So you're going to have to, like, you'd have to deallocate these, essentially, most likely, unless they're good for you. You might luck out and have these turn into something good, but it's a bit of, like, a gamble in terms of that. It's not, like, perfect placement here, but we really can't place it anywhere else without investing more points, right? So just something to kind of keep in mind there. That kind of, like, works pretty well with the Leech, I would say. Like, I would use that combination with a Leech if you're going to use that combination. But I think this one's the better one overall because it just gives you so much more damage. This is kind of late game, though, because Divergent Berserk is going to be expensive, most likely. And these jewels are fairly expensive at the start anyway, so I wouldn't really worry about them. That's why there wasn't one in the original incarnation of the build. Let me see if there's anything else. So I'm just going to quickly touch over the blood magic version. So I don't know if I have the helm in here, but you would basically use Malachi's Awakening, right? And this flask is, like, for some reason in PoB, if you have Malachi's Awakening on, and then you put on an aura, like just one of them even, it doesn't do the thing where you're allowed to put on one aura without it costing against your life. So this is to simulate Zealotry. So you turn that on, kind of goes up by a decent amount, right? And then you would unspec out of the mana stuff. It gives you, like, more free points to put elsewhere. It works particularly good with the Lethal Pride Jewel because when you have Berserk active, it actually, in terms of how it's siphoning, like, the rage from it, the decaying rage, it's based on your mana regeneration. So your mana regeneration during Berserk goes completely into your rage, I believe, or it might just be all the time. Yeah, okay, so it's just all the time, like, your mana regen goes into your rage generation. And the nice thing about running this with blood magic is that your totems are costing life, so it doesn't really matter. And if you're doing the Leech version, you're getting Leech back too, and even if you're running Troll Timber Spire, you're getting Leech just from having totems out, period, like 2.5% additional Leech when you have all your totems. So there's just, like, a lot of synergy there. And yeah, it's pretty good. In terms of, like, other things you can kind of do, like, you can get some easy corruptions on the first nose. You could get, like, a pretty good corruptions on this. If you go to the shield, you can see, where's Where is it? There's a bunch of good corruptions, like physical damage taken as an element, that's super good, or just crit reduction damage, really good. You could play a game where, like, if it's hard to get a 6-link Soul Mantle for whatever reason, you can keep like corrupting 5 links, and if you get like a +2 gem projectile gem 5-link, that's going to be really strong. I personally don't think that'd probably be worth it long term, but it's something you could do. I wouldn't really corrupt the Kikazarus unless you're super over res. You can get good corruptions here, but the res is actually kind of useful. Soul Tether has a good corruption in terms of like the it's like boosts your aura benefit, so you could use it to boost zealotry if you're doing the blood magic version. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Oh, how to level is the last thing, right? So how I'm going to level, and I'll be doing some practice with this later on, is I think I'm going to just do Stormblast Mine or whatever, like the Lightning Mine at the start with Orbistorm, and then eventually Wave of Conviction in Act 2. Going to be playing around that, and then probably use that to take me to like Spellslinger. And I'm going to be playing Spellslinger, which Spellslinger is basically like you attack with like a wand, and you can have multiple Spellslingers set up in different links, right? And the idea is that all those will trigger when you attack, and it'll cast a spell like at the mobs, essentially. And I think it gets like some sort of damage effectiveness from the Spellslinger itself. So that seems to be a pretty good way to level from what I've been watching people do that. And I'm either going to do that to 38, or maybe even to Blood Aqueduct if it feels good. I'm going to test it tonight, because the thing is that, like, Blood Aqueduct, usually you would just go totems in Act, like, when you do Lab, right? Even though you don't really get, like, you're kind of dropping Onslaught, which makes you a little slower, but it's just, like, you're way more powerful with 3 totems on Hierophant. The thing is, like, this build, you don't really get access to another totem. And even though getting Instruments of Virtue for the Battle Mage is going to help your damage a lot, it's still going to be a bit awkward, maybe clearing with 2 totems. And I think you get multiple totem support at 38. So once you get multiple totem support, I think everything will be fine, to be honest. But prior to that, I'm not sure if you'd have good clear. I would personally use Arc Totem once you swap to totems until you have all your Freezing Pulse stuff set up, like your first snows and everything. Because without first snows, it's going to feel terrible, obviously. But yeah, so I'd use Arc, and I would wait until at least you had like level 38 for the multiple totem support, most likely. So just something to keep in mind. You also want to be able to get some placement speed initially, you know what I mean? Otherwise, it's going to feel weird, because you're not going to have some of the Hyro stuff to help you out there. So I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Again, this is the more like budget version. You're going to be playing at the start, non-blood magic, most likely. And feel free to, for the Helm enchant, you probably want Freeze Pulse projectile speed, basically. And make sure you get the quality Freeze Pulse as soon as possible before switching, because having a no projectile speed Freeze Pulse is a big feels bad, man. That's part of the reason why we don't level with it. So, yeah. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys have fun tomorrow when the league starts, and I'm going to be putting some more videos out on some other builds I have and stuff like that, so stay tuned. But yeah, see you guys later.